All right, everybody, it's Friday. That means it is our Locked On Summer Road Trip. This time we are headed to Detroit, and there's never a shortage of things to talk about when it's the Avalanche and the Red Wings. Let's get to this, a crossover between us, the Avalanche, and the Locked On Red Wings.
Your Locked On Avalanche, your daily podcast on the Colorado Avalanche. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of Locked On Avalanche. We are joined by the host of Locked On Detroit Red Wings, Brian Fisher and Scott Bentley, and of course, Mr. Shaggy Von Du, my co-host over at Locked On Avalanche. Thank you for tuning in, making this your first listen of the day. That is always appreciated. We are a lot to get to on this episode because when is there not anything to talk about when it's the Avalanche and the Red Wings? I mean, I think things have calmed down between the fan bases, but it's still there. It's still in the background. It's always in the back of the mind, is it not?
Well, it's not only it's I think what has also helped is that both teams are very like their front offices and coaching staffs are like very like the old boys club is like very much still like kind of running both.
Involved.
So I think
Absolutely.
that's probably fueled it a little bit longer as well.
Yes. So a lot to get to. You can see on the rundown over there if you're joining on YouTube. We'll get to what the expectations are for this Red Wings team this season. We'll talk about Darren Helm. It's not very often a player can bring these two fan bases together. He somehow did that. But we're going to start with another player that is now going to be playing for both of these franchises. We'll get to everything that the Red Wings have done over this offseason so far, which is a ton. But we're going to start, obviously, with JT Compher. He was, signed by the Red Wings, 5.1 AAV. What was the term on that, fellas?
5 years.
5 years? Okay. We kind of knew in Avalanche land that he was not going to be hanging around. The center market was pretty thin. You knew he was going to probably cash in somewhere else. He did that. Detroit, I think, was one of the teams that people were kind of throwing around among others. But, going to Michigan for his college career, I think some people figured if it's not the Avalanche, Red Wings could be a buyer for him. They are. I want to get your take, or they were. I want to get your take on just bringing him in. Was it as expected? Was it at the number you guys are comfortable with?
Well, Scotty and I talked a lot before the free agency period opened about guys that we would want the Red Wings to bring in. And he was like on the list for us because the Red Wings going in, I mean, they weren't a playoff team. They have a lot of holes to fill. Number one, they needed scoring. Number two, they need center depth. 3, defense. 4, goaltending. Eisman kind of addressed all those things this offseason, but center depth was a huge thing. And I looked at the list, and it was, let's be honest, a weak free agent market this year. And I was like, JT Compher is like the best available player, and coming off a career year of 52 points in 82 games played with what was, as far as I can remember, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, a really banged up Colorado Avalanche team for the bulk of the season. Like, he was due to get paid, and I think he got paid a little bit more than would have been comfortable giving him. But again, that's, I think, a consequence of it being a weak free agent market. And I think he just makes the team better. So I'm overall happy with the signing.
I mean, we celebrated it for sure. And to Brian's point, like the term, I want to ask you all about the AAV, especially because that was something that we had talked about and we're like, yeah, like it's more like the weak free agent class, as Brian said, like certainly helps him in that case when he's one of the better players on the market for sure. But we were at the end of the day pretty pleased with it. And this is a team that in the Red Wings that has a ton of cap like flexibility. We just actually yesterday's show was like a whole episode about like the cap flexibility that the Wings have going forward and still at their hands currently. So kind of like we'll kind of take the overpay a little bit. It's not like we're paying somebody who's over the hill, like he's in his prime years kind of thing. Like, yeah, we'll live with it. Special teams, he can play multiple roles and all that. So we were pleased, but I did want your guys' opinion, obviously, as the team that chose to not bring him back, how you felt about the contract that he ended up getting.
Go ahead, Kyle.
No. Like 5.1 is definitely, I mean, an overpay a little bit. In
Yeah.
Colorado, yes, he came off a contract year, but the number that was being kicked around was like 3.5, maybe 4. Because yes, you are getting him off a contract year, but something we not only just JT Compher, but last year entirely, me and Chris and all the everydayers know, we went player by player listing grades, and inconsistency was the tone for a lot of players to step up. They just did not do it. And JT Compher had the opportunity to step up. Yes, he had career best in points, but you just never know what JT Compher you're going to get. And we always say, like Chris especially, when it comes to the playoffs, playoff JT Compher is what you want to see.
Yeah.
Last year, you didn't see that.
Which was weird.
It's very it's very weird. He had everything going for him, and it just didn't click. So
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a change of scenery that's going to help, but I'm also curious, is what are you expecting out of JT Compher? As you know, the former home of JT Compher, we know kind of what to expect because there's no consistency there, but what are you expecting for his contributions to the Red Wings?
Well, I mean, I think so. Brian and I did we've done a couple of episodes kind of like laying out what we expect like the lines to be already, which is like it's July, but like you know what I mean, like
Sure,
right
yeah.
now,
Yeah.
after
like it's the
free
off-season.
agency,
Yeah.
right? We added so many players that like it was kind of like justified just because of the influx of talent. So with him, our expectation right now is we actually had a debate, Brian and I, on the show on whether he was going to be the 2C or the 3C. I think we're kind of leaning toward 3 at currently, with Andrew Kopp being the 2C. But like those are, you know, performance can change. Those two are pretty, I don't know, close enough where like that becomes a conversation. And then, I mean, special teams, it was power play, right? That like he did well in. So like I think they're expecting. Currently, our expectations are a solid help on the power play and depth center. It might even end up being bottom 6 center, which is like a weird to say for a guy we just gave $5 million. But like,
Right.
I think if he's getting solid minutes when it comes to third line center and the minutes he'll get on the power play, that'll probably even itself out. So that's kind of where I stand. I don't know if you're, you know, dramatically different or not, Brian.
No, I mean, you laid it out nicely. What we talked about on the episode the other day, it's somewhere going to be 2 or 3C, like maybe 2C if Andrew Kopp goes back to his wing. Like there's a debate whether or not Andrew Kopp's a better winger than he is a center. His big thing is he can apparently win faceoffs. You didn't see a whole lot of that last year, but coming off a pretty major surgery. So like if Marco Kasper makes the roster, you move Kopp to wing, then you could see a future of like, okay, well, Compher can play like 2C, but I think as it stands right now, you're down the middle is looking like it's going to be Larkin, Kopp, Compher, Veleno, assuming Veleno ever signs his RFA contract, because that's still not done yet. But, you know, 5 point, I just keep going back to, as much as I like Compher as a signing and I like him as a player, I mean, paying $5.1 million for 5 years for your third line center just seems steep, but maybe it's not steep. Maybe this is what success. I mean, you guys won the Stanley Cup last year. Maybe you could tell me, like, do you pay 3 C's $5+ million? The Red Wings haven't been there in over a decade. So what do I know anymore?
No, you pay them $4 million, which is what exactly the Avalanche just did. And I think there's a lot of Avalanche fans listening to you guys right now say that you like the player, you question the value, the dollar value for a 3C, because there's a lot of Avalanche fans right now who are not that they hate the Ross Colton deal that they just signed for the 4 for 4.
Sure.
But that's who he's replacing is JT Compher. And you know, for you guys to say like, yeah, he could be a 2. That is one thing he can do. I'll tell you that. Like, he can go up and down the lineup. So yeah, if you need to slot him in at a 2C, he will be completely fine doing that. If for whatever reason you guys have some injuries, he's got to step up to the top line. He could do that too. He's comfortable. He is a cool as they come. Nothing really. And when you'll see when he does like interviews, he's very like monotone. He doesn't get excited. And he kind of plays that way, even on the ice. He could have a 5-point night and you wouldn't know it, because he's just very calm, cool, collected. And so you like that about him. Like, he doesn't really just show like this Nathan McKinnon over the top emotion type of guy. But I think for Avs fans, I think they were attached to him just because he had, a good amount of years there. But yes, I always looked forward to playoff JT Compher. That's kind of where he always had those years that, like Kyle was saying, just very like inconsistent or consistently inconsistent, I guess we'll say. But when it got to the playoffs, he did turn it up a dial, and that's kind of really where he had excelled. So he has qualities that you like. You mentioned the power play. He's very good. He finds good open spaces on the power play. He played more the second unit for the Avalanche. I don't know where he's going to be on the Red. I don't know what the Red Wings power play unit looks like, where he would slot in.
Probably power play 2. I would imagine
Yeah,
Larkin will be your center power play 1. So
yeah. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do if he can continue his last year with the Avalanche. Did what he was supposed to do. Had a career year and a contract year in a weak center market, and good for. And these are two teams that are in different spots when it comes to the cap. I bring up the Red Wings cap friendly. You guys are making moves left and right. And how do you still have $7 million? Right. It's crazy.
And then next year they're supposed to have like another 30 million, barring any huge extensions kicking in. But
unbelible.
That's what our whole episode on Wednesday was about.
Right.
Was the rolling cap space that the Red Wings have.
It's rolling. Yzerman refuses to give out contracts more than 4 years unless your name's Dylan Larkin. Like, so every year we have plenty of people coming off the book just as much, and it gives you the flexibility there. That's really all it is.
Wow.
Yeah, and that, I think that's the biggest surprise when we talk about this JT Compher contract, is that money, because Stevie Y and this rebuild and the eternal rebuild that has become Detroit is how smart they've been with money and how they could put contracts together. And for JT Compher to command 5.1, when yes, realistically he might be a 3C for you guys for a while. It's just, it kind of stands out, but I hope it works out for you.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I mean, same. It's, and I think, you mentioned earlier, you guys had mentioned the versatility of him. I think that certainly plays, not that single-handedly makes it, justifiable or whatnot, but I think that plays a role too. Whatever injuries will happen, lineup shuffling is bound to happen with this team and this coaching staff. It's like their favorite thing to do. So like, I'm sure he'll, on opening night, if he's 3C, I'm sure by, American Thanksgiving, he's going to be like somewhere different. Like, that's just kind of how it is. So we'll see, but that definitely was the biggest thing for sure.
All right. Let's take a quick break here from FanDuel, and then we'll discuss another player that has ties to both of these teams. And that is, of course, Darren Helm. But first, you can take your swing at betting Major League Baseball on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, and you get that win or lose. And that $200 you can spend on everything from the money line to the over under to who you think is going to be who hit the first home run. I'm assuming you guys are Tiger fans.
I'm the host of Locked On Tigers, actually.
I didn't know that. I did not know that, sir. Wow, you're pulling double duty here at Locked On.
I sure am, yes.
How are the Tigers? I haven't really been paying too much attention.
Well, it's, relative to the last 6 years better, but still not 500. So take that as you will, I guess.
All right. Still the Jim Leland smoking cigarette image.
The dog. Absolute goat.
Ever. Yeah. You can do this all on an app that's safe, secure, super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on Major League Baseball than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get up to $200 in bonus bets. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel is the official partner of Major League Baseball. All right. Darren Helm, obviously, he played a lot more for the Red Wings than he did with the Avalanche. And in his short amount of time with the Avs, people just fell in love with the guy. Not only for how he played, but he will forever have one of the most memorable goals in Avalanche playoff history.
As he does.
he will do that. Yeah.
Yeah. He's got a penchant for that. But the last second shot to beat St. Louis, it was a thing of beauty. The last year, like everybody else, seemed to have injury issues with the Avs. So he tried to come back multiple times, just couldn't do it. You were hoping that he would give it one more go around, have one more solid season. You always want that for certain guys to like end, and to end, the John Elway leaving at the top, but it wasn't in the cards for him. But still a great career. Talk about his Red Wings.
I can't believe you didn't go with the Ray Bork there, leaving at the top.
There you go.
Well, yes. I mean, that's true. I mean,
when you
go between like when you're talking like Colorado sports, I mean, it always goes. All roads lead back to Elway.
True,
but you are right. You are right with the.
We literally just talked about Ray Bork the other day too. Because we talked about how the Red Wings. Not to go off on a tangent. Sorry, but. Like talking about guys whose names and numbers could be retired by the Red Wings that aren't right now. And we talked about how the Red Wings, no offense, but the Red Wings have a really high standard. And I was like, because the Avalanche retired Ray Bork's number after a year and a half.
They did.
The organization.
It's a little bit of a controversy, but
yeah.
Hey,
but
it is what it is.
Darren Helm. I mean, you in your explanation, your breakdown of Darren Helm there, you basically encapsulated the thoughts and the feelings of Red Wings fans about Darren Helm in just a season and 11 games out of him that he gave you in Colorado. Fan favorite, memorable moments, one of the most memorable moments, at least in recent history for Red Wings fans, and often injured. Because that was our experience. He played 14 years here, and that's what he's remembered for. The overtime winner against the Chicago Blackhawks to send the Red Wings to the Stanley Cup final. I believe that was in 2009. That was the year he did it. And then constantly being injured, and then just being a fan favorite with the amount of heart, hustle, and absolute sheer speed with zero scoring ability that he had. Zero.
Yeah.
But when he did,
they were beautiful, right?
Oh, we loved Darren Helm in Detroit. It was crazy.
And the amount of time that he, like, with the beginning of his journey, like starting it out in the minors, and when he does come up, it matters. And it's a great story. And when we were talking about like injury deficits when it comes to the Avalanche in last season, and just like this overall storied career, like Darren Helm's is classic of a guy and a classy individual. Yeah. And for him to have a career with both of these storied organizations, it's poetic hockey romance personified.
Literally. I mean, he's like, if you were to make a movie about like a hockey player, it would literally be Darren Helm's career. Like just like constant, adversity, like hurt all the time, like like everything, like back, legs, like you name it. Like at one point we had like a serious injury involving it. But like when he first came up, like the goal, obviously, like the shift, like people literally just call it like the shift, like Darren Helm, there's the YouTube video of his against the Blackhawks. Like
he had a huge penalty kill too in that series that people
right. Yeah.
I think that's
of
the
course.
shift.
Like, so it's just like he has, and then, like I said, like injuries, like not playing a bunch, like then goes to a different team, like, last hurrah, I'm gonna like score like an incredibly important goal, just the same way at the end of my career that I did to start my career, and then right off into the sunset kind of thing. Like just not a perfect ending. Like it really is. It's a how can you not be romantic about hockey type of career. Truly,
he really should have not run it back one last time. Like he started his career with the Stanley Cup championship. He could have finished it with a Stanley Cup championship and just been like, I'm done.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. That's the poetic way to do it. For you guys, what was your rooting interest during that cup final between the Avs and the Lightning? Was it one of those things where it's just like, I can't root for the Avalanche, but when it's over, all right, Helmer got another one that'll put a smile on my face. How did it go for you guys?
Well, we can't root for the Lightning either. Same division. They won 2 straight cups. I personally was like, I'm done with the Lightning. I was actively rooting for the Avalanche, and that's going to come as maybe a blasphemous statement to some of our listeners. But I mean, the brawls happened in the 90s. Like that was 25 years ago at this point. I'm 27. So to me,
you remember it fondly is what you're
saying. I understand, but like these are completely, and Scotty's credit, like he mentioned, front office is very much like those. That's the core, is those guys. But like this team, they're not the same teams anymore.
Right.
They're very vastly different teams. None of the players from those years are there. So like, I'm like, that rivalry is bookended. It's in the past. Like, this is a new Avalanche team. And I really like Cale Makar, and I really like Nathan McKinnon, and I really love me some Darren Helm. So let's get them a cup because they are too good to never have a cup.
It quite literally, Darren Helm single-handedly started one of the most chaotic, like 48-hour periods on Red Wings Twitter I think I've ever seen, because everybody was just arguing about whether it was okay to root for the Avs in the cup. Like,
Wow.
legitimately, that was like, everybody was like, no, you can never do it. And then, like, mostly the younger crowd was like, what are you talking about? Like, we want to see Darren Helm get a ring, like another one kind of thing. Like, I mean, genuinely, for like 2 days straight, it was just absolute. You couldn't do anything without seeing a bunch of people fighting and calling each other names over whether it was okay to root for the Avs in the cup. So, like,
Wow.
it's funny you asked that, because that was incredibly controversial 2 years ago at this time.
Also,
Yeah,
like,
go ahead.
the biggest part of the controversy, like, or the rivalry was Claude Lemieux, right? Like, that was the big focal
He's Sider's
point.
agent.
He's more Sider's agent. So like, it's kind of, we're at a point now where it's all just like, you throw your hands in the air, you go, whatever.
Right. I'm with you guys. Like, I was 15, 16 when that rivalry was going on. So like, I was in the throes of it and remember it fondly, but you're right. Like, it was a moment in time. It was a great moment in time.
Fantastic.
And we can always look back on it saying, like, that was one of hockey and sports greatest rivalries ever. And, now that they don't play, like, they're in opposite conferences, like, they don't play all the time now. It's fun to revisit it whenever they play each other. But I think that the hatred to me is gone. I don't think it's there anymore. And for us, if the roles were reversed and you guys make a Stanley Cup with JT Compher on your team, depending on who you play, I think that's, it's the matchup, right? I can't think of a Western Conference team that I really care about that I would want. I can tell you this: if it was Vegas, it's Red Wings all day. Red Wings all day, sweep them down. You know what I mean? But no, I think Kyle's in the same boat. Like, you guys are a classic team. You're an original six team. I think the only original six team like I cannot get behind is Boston. Other than that,
no complaints here.
So it was fun to hate on them in the 90s and the early 2000s, but I think collectively, and it is generational, right? You were saying, like, on Twitter, like, maybe the older crowd, like my crowd was saying, like, no, you can't root for them, but some of the younger was like, why do you hate them so much? And so it makes a lot of sense. But I think I was in the same boat.
I think the rivalry is like, in school, you competed with that one person with grades all the time, and it was just compete. And you graduated, and you see that person out in the store, and you just kind of give them a nod, like, we went through a lot, but look at where we are right now. I think that's where we are as teams. Like, we went through a lot. We're not there anymore. We're not competing against each other like we used to. The road doesn't go through Detroit and Colorado like it used to. We're in two completely different conferences. It's divisions. Everything is completely different. We've moved on, but there's still that little nod of, I rember you. But things are different.
I think that's a fantastic way to put it, honestly. Like, it's like you sit down, whatever, 20 years later, and you're like, man, like, that was crazy, but like it hasn't been a thing in a long time. And like, I mean, obviously, if Lord willing, these two teams were to meet in the cup in the future, then it would instantly probably like come rushing back for a lot of people.
All come back.
Like,
all gloves are off.
Right. Yeah. But like, as it stands right now, I think it's like the Red Wings Twitter account tweets out like Happy Turtle Day every year. Like, it's like a fun thing to like do, like, in that regard. But like, it's not I don't know. It's hard for me to like actively, like, on a nightly basis when I'm watching hockey in the winter, I'm not like, got to make sure the Avs lost tonight. Like, I don't, you know what I mean? Like, it's far gone for sure.
So you mentioned, if these two teams were to make it to the Stanley Cup final, and why don't we just talk about that, like, where the Red Wings stand going into next season? I remember I was watching the draft, and the Red Wings made, I think, their first pick. And then Yzerman's doing an interview, with ESPN, and he said something where he was I don't know verbatim what it was, but it was to the effect of like, we're not there yet. We're not there. Like we haven't gone out and we're not going to go get that big name yet because we don't feel like we're there. And that was all bull crap, I think, because was that just like he's playing it so nobody thinks like he's a player, and then he goes and does what he did in the free agency. So I mean, you guys have to be feeling, even with all this money that you still have socked away, the moves that have been made this offseason and all the offseason that have come before it, like all those players are kind of getting their due now. Not all of them, but a lot of them are getting their due. Like, you have to be going into this season, and you did last season. Okay, anything is possible, but is it different this year? Because you guys are really set up to do, I don't want to say do damage, but you could force the issue. You're in a tough conference, however. What's your mindset right now going into this season?
I think so. Last offseason, Scotty and I talked, and we were like, this team is better, but it's not there yet. We want to be in the wild card conversation for as long as possible. And they were. You were. I mean, going into the trade deadline, they were like before those back-to-backs against Ottawa, where they crushed us and crushed our dreams. The Red Wings were in a playoff spot. And then they didn't get eliminated from playoff contention until literally the final week of the season. This year, Scotty and I have spoken. We haven't done our whole Atlantic Division breakdown yet, but we're pretty much in agreement that the expectation should be like wild card contention, like not get eliminated last week, but like you need to be pushing for that spot, like in active contention, not like, oh, well, you didn't technically get eliminated until the last week of the season, but like actually there in that conversation. Because after, and I know it was a weak free agent class, and you mentioned the Yzerman thing is so funny because Scotty and I have talked so much about how you can't believe anything that Yzerman says, but when he said that, he got me. Like he got me. I was like, oh, this man, I can't believe he's going to do this. And then he traded for DeBrincat. we are of the mindset like this has to be the year where it changes. Like you can't get caught in that middle ground. You can't get caught like the Minnesota Wild for decades. Now they're finally making the playoffs, still getting eliminated in the first round. But you know, for decades they were that team that just barely missed the playoffs every year. The Red Wings cannot afford to be that team because then you don't get good draft picks and you don't make the playoffs. So it's the worst of both worlds. You have to make that leap. And I think Yzerman has poised the organization to make that leap as soon as this year. Now, I think once Kasper and Danielson and Edvinsson and all their other prospects, because they have one of the best prospect pools in the league as well, really start to crack the lineup, then you're going to really see this team take that real leap. But I mean, with DeBrincat and the free agent signings, this team is better on paper than they were last year.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that you could see them make a push, just like you said, though. Really tough division.
Yeah, the division certainly is like is a huge factor there. I think it's funny after Yzerman made those comments, Brian was like, I can't not freaking out about it. He was like, that's so disheartening, whatever. And I was like, my rebuttal to all of it, like I let him go for like whatever 5-7 minutes of just like how disappointed he was, and I was like, my opinion is Steve Yzerman's a liar. Like that is that is my opinion. Like this dude lies. Like he's talks a lot and doesn't say anything. Like this dude is a liar. And obviously the DeBrincat thing happened. And yeah, I emulate a lot of what Brian said. I think last year our prediction was like be one of the best teams to miss the postseason, and that's pretty much what happened. I think we would have liked to be maybe a little closer at the end of it, but they sold at the deadline and whatnot. And so I think that they did that decently well. And I think this year I'm with Brian. I'm pretty lockstep there. I think I don't think it's ridiculous for a Red Wings fan going into opening night to be like, I expect this team to be in the wild card at the end of the season.
Yeah.
And how do Red Wings fans feel, like we mentioned earlier, like the eternal rebuild that Detroit has been in? You guys are basically building this team in reverse of the rest of the teams in the East. I follow a team or two in the East, and it's always like load up your forwards, address everything afterwards. You have Ville Husso in net. You have a very solid top four when it comes to defense. Now the forwards are coming to play. Now you're starting to put those pieces together. Has the proof of concept this far into the never-ending rebuild. Is it starting to show? And do you think this is the way you should go if you want to start knocking off the top of the teams in the East?
I mean, I love doing like the opposite of like the mainstream flow there. Like there's a plethora of examples. Obviously, as you learned, like I host Locked On Tigers, so there's a lot of examples in the baseball world of teams doing that too. Like everyone's hitting homers. Okay, well now the Marlins are really good. They all hit singles. Like so, like there's examples of people doing that, and I love it. It's also just like very much like I don't know, like Yzerman's type is just like 6'6" Swedish defenseman. Like that's just, we're gonna have a whole blue line of like very, very large European defensemen. And so I think that his throughout this rebuild, he was given nothing when it came to prospects, right? When the handoff was made, he was given nothing. There was not a very, very few prospects in that pool that are like still like even close to impact players today. A couple, but like it's very few and far between. And so he's trimmed off all the cap and all the money that was spent. He started addressing the blue line to shore up that side of it, to your point. And then in the last, I don't know, 3 years, it's been more of like they're still going to get their defenseman every draft. They're still going to get their prototype big defenseman, but they've been, okay, we need some goal scoring at some point. And I think that is really, to me, what the DeBrincat trade signified. Was like, to me, that's the date you circle on your calendar. And then it's like, that's when the Red Wings decided now is the time, because there was no goal scoring. It was the biggest problem last year. It's been the biggest issue for the last couple of years. They have a lot of playmakers and no one that's willing to actually put the puck in the back of the net. And DeBrincat certainly is a shoot first goal scorer. And so like that's, like address one area through the draft, and then you can sign or trade for something down the road to put you over the edge. And I think that the timing is really the biggest part. And I like the timing currently.
Yeah, I mean, Scotty brings up a good point. Steve Yzerman does definitely have a type. He definitely builds. I mean, if this was the NFL, people would say, build the trenches, and that's essentially the NHL version of what Yzerman is doing. Those big defensemen. He likes size on the blue line, size that can skate. Especially like Edmondson's a good skater and Seider is a really good skater, guys like that. But I also think that where they ended up in these draft lotteries has a lot to do with the path they took in these drafts, because I mean, obviously these last 2 seasons, they didn't really have great odds, but there were like 2 or 3 straight seasons where they were in contention for the number 1 overall pick. And we all remember 2020 and Lafreniere. And yeah, he hasn't really panned out. I blame that more on the Rangers' inability to develop talent. I mean, you can't draft a guy number 1 overall and then stuff him on the 4th line and expect him to develop. But that's a whole different conversation for a different day.
Tune into Lock On Rangers.
Yeah. John Chick does a great job.
John's awesome.
I think that it also has a lot to do with positional value too, when you think about it, because in the NHL, like defensemen are really hard to evaluate. You can get a goal scorer in every single draft. Like every single draft, you always hear about who is the top end goal scorers and what teams they're going to go to. The Red Wings in this draft passed on several guys who are touted as they passed on guys like Oliver Moore and Zach Benson and what's the kid's name that went to was it right after the Red Wings went 10th overall? I'm drawing a blank. But a European kid, really well known for being such a great scorer. One of our commenters will tell me what it is.
Which draft is this? Which year?
This one. This
year.
This
past one? Okay.
Like even this year in a stacked draft, they went with a 2-way center as their pick. Like they clearly have a pathway, because Yzerman thinks he can get scoring in pretty much any draft if he really needs it, or address it via trade by a guy who just wants to simply come home and Alex DeBrincat. So I really like the method that he's taken, because as much as I would love to have a Connor McDavid or an Austin Matthews or a Leon Draisaitl, what has all that scoring gotten them in the end since their rebuild has began? They have top end scoring talent, but without defense and without goaltending, Edmonton made it to the Eastern or Western Conference Finals, but they can never get there. You have to have good goaltending, which is hopefully in the works with Kosa, and you have to have good defense if you want to win championships. I mean, that's the saying, right? Defense wins championships.
Sure. As far as last year goes, if your fan base needs someone to blame, they can blame me because Adam Denker from Locked On Lightning and I host the Thursday NHL Locked On NHL show. And at the trade deadline, we gave our teams that we thought were going to make a run. I picked the Detroit Red Wings. So I'm not saying I have like the kiss of death, but
it's all part of the plan.
Yeah. So that's totally my fault. All right, everybody. So like I said in the beginning of this episode, there's always a lot to talk about when it's the Avalanche and the Red Wings. So of course, this episode went a little long. So what we're going to do is break this up into 2 parts. You just watched part 1. We will put out part 2 on Saturday, and you're not going to want to miss that because it's a continuation of a great conversation we had with those guys over at Locked On Red Wings. So thank you for tuning in and listening to part 1. Like we said, part 2 will be out likely Saturday morning or maybe even Friday night. We'll see how it goes. But either way, thank you for tuning in. And definitely, like we said, check out part 2. Appreciate you guys tuning in.